So this video is going to replace the instruction that I would have given in class about our compare and contrast essays. So this video, or if I need to, I might break it up into two videos, is just supposed to augment um, though the instruction that you would have been given if you want to do a rewrite. So while this is not mandatory, it would definitely benefit you in further instruction that we're going to be doing in class. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the most common feedback that I gave, and that has to do with the thesis statements. Um, the most common thing that I made, the comment that I made about thesis statements was that they were generally incomplete arguments. Okay, so that to me is the biggest issue that I saw: incomplete arguments with our thesis statement. Miss Hain, what does that look like? Well, take a look at this thesis statement below, right? So even though the atmospheres of Belleux and MIT are opposites, Cedric experiences identity trouble in both. And so here's what I'm going to identify. It is clear that the student is going to be contrasting because they say opposites. And they also do identify the subjects. Cedric at both MIT and Belleux. So we're going to be looking at Cedric at Belleux and Cedric at MIT. The basis of comparison is going to be the atmospheres there. And then the overarching so what seems to be, or generally can be understood as, his identity trouble, kind of. So here's the issue that I'm seeing. So even though it's clear that they're doing contrasting, and they do have subjects, Cedric at Belleux and Cedric at MIT, the overarching basis of comparison, which they have stated to be the atmospheres, is very unclear. What do you mean the atmospheres being opposites? I don't know what you mean by opposites. How are they opposite? So I see that you're talking about atmospheres, but okay, what are you talking about in terms of atmosphere? I have no idea what type of atmosphere you're referring to. Are you talking about social? Are you talking about academic? It is unclear. And then to say that Cedric experiences identity trouble in both, I am not sure what that is trying to say for this paper. I'm not sure how that relates to the paper. I am very unclear. Now it seems to be this idea of overarching so what, but that is generally unclear about what that means. Okay, so what does a good thesis look like, Ms. Hain? Well, it looks like this. Okay, so through contrasting environments at Belleux and Belleux and Brown, Cedric develops differing values relating to religion and social relationships, emphasizing the influence a setting can create on an individual's values in society. So let's break this down, and what does this mean? So first of all, it's clear that they are going to be doing contrasting. Not only do they actually use the word contrasting, they also talk about differing. It's clear what the student is talking about. So the student is going to be talking about Cedric again at Brown and Ballou. So notice how they're talking about again the environments there. Okay. So the environment is still a little unclear, all right, but at least now I get a better understanding. Like, I'm not really sure what atmosphere was. Environment might be a little more specific, but the bigger thing that I want to say that is strong about this is that they are making it more clear what they're going to be looking at, right? So while Cedric at Belleux and Cedric at Brown is going to be their subject, they're talking about the differing values relating to religion and to social relationships. So this is strong. This is a good thesis because they show me clearly that they are going to be looking at religion at Belleux and social relationships at Belleux. And then I also see that they're going to be talking about religion at Brown and social relationships at Brown. And I know they're talking about it and how it's different. Okay. Now, the other thing that this thesis does a really good job at is this last part: emphasizing the influence a setting can create on an individual's values in society. That is beautiful. That is the overarching so what. Okay? So this is what I was saying to a lot of you about what an overarching so what is. Okay? So you're not just this thesis statement isn't just saying, "Oh, look, I'm looking at Cedric at Ballou and Cedric at Brown and I'm talking about how he's different if his religion and his social relationships there." That is not what this paper is only talking about. While that is the overarching, or that's the big concept that this paper is talking about, the emphasizing the influence a setting can create on an individual's values in society, that is the overarching reason why this is being done. So this is a big deal because what's happening now is this student is telling me, like, they're not just this paper, while it is about Cedric, this topic of this paper can be applied beyond Cedric. So what would that look like in terms of the paper? So their first body paragraph, so I'm just going to put first, well, that should probably be thinner so that we can see it a little better. So the first paragraph is going to be about Cedric at Brown. I'm just going to put Cedric Brown. Oh, sorry, probably Cedric at Ballou, and how he's talking about religion. Okay, so then at the end of that paragraph, they're going to be talking about how the environment relates, how the Ballou environment influences their concept of religion. So how does Ballou influence what he believes about religion? Then the next body paragraph could be about Cedric at Brown, or I'm sorry, Cedric at Ballou, and how he's talking about social relationships. So I'm just going to put, sorry about my handwriting, don't be mad. So they're going to have evidence talking about Ballou and social relationships, and then again, they're going to, at the end of this body paragraph, relate to how this environment influenced his social relationships. So that might say something about, like, how since Ballou was threatening, Cedric did not develop social relationships and actually rebuffed social relationships. In this paragraph here, they might talk about how since Ballou was so difficult, he needed faith in something larger than himself to help him, right? So they're talking about how Ballou as an environment influenced this, how Ballou as an environment influenced this. Then their next body paragraph, so this was body paragraph 1, this was body paragraph 2, then their second body paragraph, or excuse me, sorry, that would be their third body paragraph, talked about Cedric at Brown. Okay, so Cedric at Brown and talking about religion, and then again giving examples about how Cedric at Brown is related to religion, but then again at the end relating to environment, how Brown influenced his relationship with religion. And then again, the fourth body paragraph would be about Cedric at Brown with social relationships. Okay? And then at the end of this body paragraph, again, the environment idea is going to be there. How the environment of Brown influenced his social relationships. How he couldn't rely on his intelligence anymore to insulate him. He had to look outward to the environment required him to look for social relationships. And then the big thing here is going to be the conclusions. Okay, when I talk about the overarching so what, the conclusion is going to be what's going to really solidify that idea. Okay, so the conclusion doesn't just talk about Cedric. Most of the conclusion is going to be talking about environments in general and how they influence values. Okay, and so yeah, you're going to bring up Cedric, but you are going to be talking about how the concept of this paper applies to things beyond just Cedric, right? And so the overarching so what is what, like, that's the warrant for your paper. So right, the entire year we've been talking about warrant, and warrant is the so what. So warrant has to tell me why the evidence is important. When I talk about the overarching so what of your paper, that's you telling your reader why is your paper important to them. So like as your reader, why do I care about Cedric and Brown, Cedric at Ballou? Why does any of this matter to me? How can I apply this to my life beyond just the book? You have to give them reason as to why they should listen. Why should they listen to your ideas about Cedric and his environment? Well, because you want to talk to them about how environments in general relate to their life. Okay? How environments in general influence people's values. Now, that is the overarching so what. And I know that's a newer concept that we are developing with this paper, this assignment, but you can't just say like, "Oh, I'm writing this paper just because my teacher told me to." That's really bad writing, right? Like you're not going you want your paper, you want your writing, not just your paper, your writing at any point in time to be more organic. So don't just be like, I have to write this because my teacher told me to. You want to say, yeah, my teacher told me to write this, but there's an overarching idea that applies to everyone's life through this paper. And that's where you can define why this paper is important. It's up to you to make this important, right? So this student didn't have to talk about this idea. This student could have said something completely different. This student could have talked about how like they didn't have to talk influence of setting, right? They could have talked about perhaps outside factors, right? What does that mean, Ms. Hain? I have no idea. The student has to apply that. So while there's many similar topics that I got, right? But the reason that each one of you have different papers is because this overarching so what applies specifically to your paper and your paper alone because it's you that are making this. It's you that make the overarching idea, the overarching importance. So while one person can address this paper topic and say like, well, yeah, it's talking about the influence of setting. Someone else can look at this paper and say, no, it's actually about something completely different. It's talking about the influence that personal drive has. And that's okay. There is no one right answer. So the overarching so what is how you apply this topic outside of the topic. So it's not just, I'm talking about Cedric at Ballou and MIT. No, it's you saying, I'm looking at, oh, get out of here. No, why is oh my goodness, something is happening and something is making me sad. I'll be right back. So you are not doing just I'm talking about Cedric. I'm talking about Cedric at MIT and Ballou just because I have to. The overarching argument is saying I'm talking about Cedric at MIT and Ballou, and here's how it applies to my life, or here's how it applies to your life, reader. So you have to make your writing not interesting, more important than just I'm assigned to this. So that's what the overarching idea is. When I say overarching so what, that's what I'm talking about. And that's what you want to do to help your paper. And you can take a look, you can take a look again about what does that look like. It looks like in each body paragraph, it looks like you're going to be addressing that a little bit. Okay, so it's in your thesis and it's also in your body paragraphs a little bit. Where does it show up the most? In your conclusion. So this is where that becomes the big idea. The conclusion is where you develop that. But Ms. Hain, I thought we couldn't have new ideas in our conclusion. You're totally right, student. And you know what? It's not a new idea because you have put it in your thesis, you have developed it in your body paragraphs. Your conclusion just really slaps them in the face and says this is why it's important. Because remember, the conclusion is the lasting impression that you have about the paper. That's why summaries. I know you were taught really well when you were younger to do a summary, but that's why summaries make us sad now. Okay. So when you do a summary conclusion, it makes your reader sad. Why? Because they've just read your paper. Why are you telling them about what they just read? Instead, the summary is not good. the conclusion is there to tell us what the overarching so what is.